Welcome to Now for Someone Completely Interesting. I'm your host, Ben Poulin. Now, normally what I would do is have a prepared introduction and lead into this, which I did have and which I did do, but it's kind of confession time. I did this whole podcast 2 nights ago with my guest here, and due to technical difficulties, after all was said and done, and she went home back to her family, that didn't save properly. There was massive portions of our interview that did not save, did not record, so I could not release it. Thank goodness she was kind enough to offer to do this again and sit in on this. So, Breana Malcomson, welcome back.
Thank
I guess
you.
in a sense, I'm really grateful. I'm so embarrassed and flustered by this whole situation that it didn't work. So.
Don't be. It was just another reason to get together.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, you had so much the first time.
Yeah.
We couldn't resist. So for the second time, welcome back. Now, in what I had actually prepared last time was a couple nights ago when we did do the original podcast here. It was, to my recollection, the first time we had met face to face. And I was excited as to, kind of get to know you. And there was a couple things that definitely stood out. First of all, you had been recommended by several people to be on this podcast, including 2 of my previous guests. So obviously there was a lot of interest in having you on here. So we're kind of going to go through the motions again a little bit because there was a lot of interesting stuff that came up and starting kind of right from the beginning. And it was, so you were born and raised in St. Paul, correct?
Born and raised at the St. Therese Health Center. Yeah, born there, raised the rest of my life.
You mentioned too, did you say you asked your mom if she could still remember which room it was?
Yeah, and I think I'm pretty sure it's the same room that I later delivered Arwen in, which is room 207.
Okay.
So yeah, no, second floor baby.
So went to school in St. Paul, elementary, all the way up through high school.
Yep.
And then post-secondary, you went into education, correct?
Right. So I started with my arts degree. I got that through the U of A, Grand McEwen U of A transfer program, and I worked a day and decided that was not going to be what I did for the rest of my life. I thought I was going to save the world with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Sociology minor, and learned really, really quickly that is not so much the case. You can't do much with an arts degree. Everybody, don't know if you know that. Applied right away to get my ed degree. So went to Concordia and got my education after degree, and taught. Got a job right out of college or university,
Right.
and went down to Airdrie, lived a year in Airdrie while commuting back and forth after meeting a guy from Murnum. Drove up and down Highway 2.
Went all the way to Airdrie just to meet a guy from Murnum.
Right, as you do. And you're moving, so we met in May originally, and then formally met each other again in June. And I was to start teaching in September. So of course you meet somebody right as soon as you're going to move.
Of course.
So it seems like a good idea. So he was still at the university. So we, commuted back and forth up Highway 2.
So you started teaching, you said you were in Airdrie.
Yeah.
What kind of teaching, like what grades, I guess, were you?
So I was a grade 3 generalist. So tiny little farming community called Catherine, Alberta, just outside Airdrie.
Okay.
It is just a school in a field. Like if you passed the fence, you were in someone's field. There was no actual community to it. It was just a school. So taught out there as a grade 3 teacher. So I taught everything, all the subjects like you would in a typical elementary classroom. Except I didn't teach my own phys ed. The principal taught my kids phys ed. So taught them everything.
How long were you there for?
Just 1 year.
Just 1 year, okay.
Because my husband decided, or my boyfriend at the time decided, he wanted to move home. He wanted to be close to his mom because he's a mom's boy, close to his folks because he's still very close with them.
Right.
So he moved me. I decided I would move back up and start looking for a job. And I had no problem. I got a job right away teaching in Two Hills. So,
okay.
Yeah.
At same kind of teaching when you were in Two Hills?
I was a grade 6 teacher.
Okay.
Taught grade 6 language arts and dabbled in all sorts of options. And then I'm the coordinator of student support. Still am the coordinator of supports, which is just somebody who does all the IPPs, the paperwork for students with disabilities.
Okay.
And yeah, and then that's how kind of I transitioned to SPAKE, which is
Right.
the outreach school.
And that's kind of where it piqued my interest, because we kind of hear about this, and there's a lot of communities that have the so it's St. Paul Alternative Education Center is what that stands for.
Yep.
Okay, so you've been there how long now?
I'm pretty sure it's 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Why did you decide to go into that, as like to move from the, I guess, more conventional education system to something that's a little bit different and a little bit more tailored to special needs or circumstances, we should say?
I've always been somebody who just advocates for those people who can't necessarily. I worked at a group home for special needs kids. I was an EA when I was in university working with, one-to-one students. So I've always kind of been in and around youth. And so when I was teaching out in Two Hills, there was an EA and myself and we ran a room, and it was just kind of like this hodgepodge of kids who needed a one-off course. Or I taught Math 20-3 to these 4 boys because when you're in a smaller school, there isn't the opportunity to have a whole range of classes. So I was teaching these boys Math 20-3 because that's what they needed. And then I had kids doing forensics, kids doing language arts. And so we kind of became this like little in reach within our school. And then I kind of, I had worked a lot with the principal at the time, which Janice Minch, just within the coordinators world. So she kind of, proposed me coming to town. So after 5 years of teaching Two Hills, I broadened my horizons and came over to the outreach world full time. So
okay, now let's not just pigeonhole, I guess, that it's a special needs course or anything like that. That's actually not at all what it is. And I think that's always been a little bit of my misunderstanding about it until we had actually talked 2 nights ago there. But what are some of the circumstances that brings students into this program?
So outreach definitely has like that bad boy image, that it's kind of the bad kids, they don't fit into school, the misfits, that sort of thing. But it is not that at all. We have kids who are extremely academic and want to get through courses faster. So we'll have kids start their diploma courses in September and end in November to kind of shrink it, or they'll finish their high school within 2.5 years. There's a program called Knowledge and Employability. It was, if you were a student way back in the day, it was like IOP. We had IOP courses. So K&E just allows kids to work through a little bit faster, work on their foundational skills. So we have a lot of kids that are doing that because they've missed, a few years of education. And it's a great fit for kids who have anxiety, social anxiety, or they can't make it 5 days a week, or young mothers, kids who have jobs, all that sort of stuff. Right.
And it's not like a conventional classroom setting either.
Not at all. So in my classroom, we have an EA that circulates around and I circulate around, but there's kids working on every course. Nobody is sitting down and working at the same pace or the same course at all. There's kids working on the 10-4, which would be K&E, but then there's kids working at 30-2, which is like your diploma courses. So, and they're side by side working at their own pace, doing their own thing. So there's no teacher in front, giving a grand lesson that everybody has to listen to. It's quite quiet and calm throughout the day. So
is there a way, and we had talked about this before too, is there a way that if there's an individual, a student, teenager, young adult that thinks this might be a fit for them, how would they, I guess, go about finding out more, or whether or not it is something that would work for them? Did they just kind of drop in and visit you guys?
They totally could. Okay. Yeah, we love visitors. We love visitors that bring coffee, just so everybody knows that. We take whatever. But no, they can check us out on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, Snakes Bird. Or they could just call the school. We have 645-5015 is our phone number. And yeah, we're kind of at that point in the school year where it's kind of dying out, but definitely looking for students for next year. And
well, it might be a good opportunity, a little bit quieter, a little less, I don't know if there'd be an intimidating factor or not, but when you're trying to assess yourself as far as where you want your education to go, maybe it's, and so you guys are, you're not necessarily part of the regional high school, but
Nope.
in St. Paul, but you're attached, like physically attached to the schools.
We're attached. Yeah. Apparently
Okay.
way back in the day, it was the woodworking area of the high school.
Okay.
So if you were in high school at the regional moons ago, it was the woodworking area. So, and then it became the tech department, and now it's our little wing of the world. So
All right. So you mentioned coffee.
Yes.
I'm glad you did.
that was a good segue. Hey, I didn't even plan that.
So like I said, there's two facets that really stuck out when it was actually on this podcast. Brenda Rosenchuk had recommended you to be on this podcast, but also a mutual friend of ours, Missy Finley, who was also a previous guest. It wasn't on the podcast, but there was a few times that she's actually recommended. And one of the times was we had gone to her house. I think it was just after New Year's here this year. And we had brunch, and she served up a cup of coffee and said, these beans were roasted by a friend of mine. And we tried that. And then I think it was 4 or 5 cups later that I said, yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, okay, let's start out. It's called Backroad Farmhouse Roasting Company.
Absolutely.
Okay. Usually when we're thinking coffee,
Yes.
we're thinking somewheres in South America on a plantation, or you've got some sort of big import facility. But
Yeah.
this is a local business here.
Yep.
Tell us how. Well, first of all, how do you get into roasting coffee?
So I'm pretty fortunate. My husband works away. So we've been, my twins were born in Toronto because that's where he was working at the time. And then,
Okay.
Since then we've been in BC. So we were in the lower mainland for 3 years. And now this will be our 3rd summer in Clearwater, which is just about an hour outside of Kamloops.
Okay.
So I'm very fortunate. I get to go to all these farmers markets all summer long because, teachers, that's when we vacation. So everywhere I went, I just kind of saw these like coffee roasters and, one-offs of people selling coffee. And if I can get to a market anywhere, like I will drive multiple hours to get to like Christmas markets or any kind of market. That's my jam. So yeah, there were all these coffee roasters, and I was like, I could do that. So I told my husband, I'm like, I think we should start roasting coffee. And he said, you're crazy. But no, he bought me a little coffee roaster as a Mother's Day present. And so it was May, and I'm roasting at home occasionally, and he would, how's it going? I was like, no, I'm going to bring it for the summer. So I took it with me to Clearwater, and then, we would sit there at night and roast coffee, and it's just this like nice little tumbling sound of beans and popping. It's, I'm making it sound so romantic, but it smells like burnt beans. But anyway, so it's tumbling away, and then he just kind of took it over a little bit, and he started like really doing some research, and he would look at the weather outside and like the temperature outside and the barometric pressure or the atmospheric pressure anyway. And he had all sorts of like just strategies and charts and things. So he was roasting things for me. And then I was coming home to go back to work, and he's like, are you going to take that home? And I said, like, I really don't have time at all. We had just bought the farmhouse. I was like, no. And he's like, okay, well, I think I'm going to roast coffee. So he started roasting, and he found his distributors and all sorts of stuff. And it went from there. He took it over. So
technically he's the coffee roaster.
He's the roaster. I said today, I'm like, I'm being terrible. I haven't posted on social media in so long, but it is what it is.
It's called Backroad Farmhouse. Why did you choose that name?
So Jay and I, during the COVID run, we decided we wanted to live in the country. We had dirt bikes, and we had quads for the kids and snow machines, and we lived in town, and that just didn't work for me. So we bought a little piece of land, nice little 23 acres just outside of town, and 1930s farmhouse, and that's how it started. We bought this farmhouse and started renovating it.
Right.
That was my COVID project. Was I'd put the kids to bed, run out to the farmhouse and sand stairs or take up flooring, and I hired high school kids to come and rip down plaster and lath and all sorts of stuff. So it became this little adventure. So we named it the Backroad Farmhouse, just so people could follow us along with us on Facebook and Instagram.
Right.
Because I have watched countless hours of Fixer Upper, Island of Bryan, all sorts of
Gotcha.
HGTV shows. So
You did mention at one point too, though, it had a lot of historical relevance to the area. Like it's the family that originally owned it
Yeah.
still around here. And...
Totally. So as far as I know, it is one of the two Belzel brothers that came and settled
Okay.
in the area, and they were big farmers from America, is what I've heard. So they had this big cattle ranch between the two. So there's my yard, and the brother built across the yard, which is now like the Labant house,
Okay.
like Mrs. Labant. So yeah, the two brothers built these brick houses and they lived there. And so there have been multiple, like countless children raised in the house. There's been weddings at the house. There's been people that have spent their wedding nights in our house. So it's been so much fun to like have people message and say, my mom and dad were married there, or
Oh, wow.
that's my aunt, or anything. And it's been amazing. It's been so cool.
When you were renovating the house, did you ever find anything like any little historical trinkets or keepsakes or mementos that might have been forgotten over time?
I really wish I had like really cool things. We found pennies.
Okay.
We found, which were cool. Like they
Yeah.
were really old pennies. We found a really cool hanger that later I had put away and later got tossed in, not by me, but I don't know who to blame. So I just blame all of them, that my hanger's gone. But no, just even like the doors, the doorknobs, like they're all solid wood doors and really old iron or brass handles. Like we tried to keep as much as we could while still modernizing it and making it a little bit.
It's kind of a neat thing to kind of mesh the two passions. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Coffee to me seems to have an old timey feel to it as well. So
It's
it
a
seems
slow,
almost, yeah.
right? Like when I try anyway to drink my coffee, and it's like a little bit slower.
Just a little bit back to the coffee then. So roasting the coffee itself, like, okay, so obviously there's no coffee bean plantations
There is
around here.
not.
So how do you, where do you get your beans from? How does that all work?
So right now we aren't big enough to kind of know any farmers or,
Right.
have any contact with sources right down, in the countries that we're buying from. So we buy from a smaller distributor in Vancouver.
Okay.
And she sources all her beans from the farmers. So it's she gets the organic beans from them. Then we buy from her and roast it and sell
Okay.
it. So
The roasting itself, like, is there, we've all heard of like flavored coffee, stuff
Right.
like that. What goes into that? Like, is it part of the roasting process, or I've never found anything out there.
Yeah, no, not so much. It's so you would find a lighter bean. You typically do I guess you don't have to. We typically roast our flavored coffees a little bit lighter.
Okay.
So we like to use the Guatemalan bean. So we use that, and then you just add oils after. So we have an Irish cream and a Highlander grog, which is like a rummy butterscotchy type coffee flavor. So we add that after. So you've already roasted it, then you add your oil and let it all kind of dry and cool. And
Okay, so it's the oil that kind of adds the flavors to
That
it.
oil does,
so
yeah.
What the roasting itself would be like? How dark? How light?
Absolutely.
That's the process of that.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So your coffee now is available for purchase.
Yes.
In
Moving on up.
where would you find it?
So Miss Deb Poulin is just so kind, and I know she's had that as her mission for a long time, to be a little bit more farm to table, locally
Right.
sourced, right? So we are very fortunate. I've worked for Deb back when Brenda and I when we were getting married, not to each other, but maybe one day, who knows? But not yet. So Brenda and I were both engaged to be married, and we were working at the golf course,
Right.
where Deb was the chef. So I've known Deb for a long time.
Right.
Before that, my sister-in-law worked for her. So yeah, we've always just known who Deb was. So
Right.
We're very fortunate. She jumped on board right away and scooped us up.
I know her too.
Yeah, a little bit. Hey.
A little bit.
Yeah.
So of course, just so we're talking about Deb. That's at the Twisted Fork here in St. Paul.
That
so
is.
okay. So you can buy the coffee there. Is there anywhere else that you guys have?
Not yet.
Okay.
I've done some markets, and I definitely want to try to get out there a little bit more. I'm hoping that we can get out a few more places in the Lakeland area. But we're also kind of limited right now, because when we say small batch, we are
Right.
really small batch. Like
That was going to be my next question. Like,
Yeah.
how much are you actually producing with a single coffee roaster.
Right. So Jay does about 200 grams per batch.
Okay.
So not very much. Like
No.
that's half a pound ish, right?
Right.
So he can get that going, and it takes about 12 minutes a roast.
Okay.
So he can do quite a bit in a short period of time because he works away without the children. So there's no bothers for him. It sounds so dreamy, being the mom, but he works very hard all day long. He's up, extremely early, and then he'll roast coffee for me in the evening. So
here's a question I'm going to ask because I overlooked it the last time we talked, but you had mentioned there too, because he did some research, some investigation.
Yeah.
We're talking like very scientific stuff.
I know.
What does your husband do?
So he's an environmentalist.
Okay.
By trade. So he went to U of A for his Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies. So he is a environmental inspector right now.
I see. Okay.
So, but like dirt, you want to get a guy excited about life. Talk dirt with Jeremy, and it's like, I don't even know.
This whole coffee roasting thing is right in his kitchen. No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of is both ways. No, and he's really like jumped on to like the sounds it makes and all sorts of stuff. So it's been nice. It's been cool to watch him develop a hobby.
So does that mean when he's working away, the coffee roaster goes with him?
It goes with him. So he's shipping it all home to me. So we've we are local, like 100%, right? He crossed a river to get to me, and or I crossed a river to get to him, I guess. But we are very local, so it is, it's not necessarily roasted here yet because he is still working away.
Right.
But hopefully one day that's a little different.
Any plans to expand on either get another roaster or anything like that?
Yes. So we have a 5-kilogram roaster we've affectionately called Cheryl. So she's living in the garage right now, and we're hoping to get her set up. But Clearwater is like a town of 1,000 people. So to try to get tradesmen and that sort of thing, we've been very fortunate, but we haven't been able to get her working 100% yet. So she has not yet turned coffee.
And sorry, can I ask why you named your roaster Cheryl?
So Cheryl is really nice and red. She's a beautiful red Turkish machine, and she's named after our friend Bud, who lives with us in Clearwater. He's like a dear gentleman, and he's the reason it's called Sea Legs Sumatra. So he owns a company in Ladysmith called Sea Legs Kayaking Adventure. If anybody ever goes out to Ladysmith, check them out. So his wife is named Cheryl, and she is just an absolute treat. And when they met, the first time he like really fell in love with her, she was wearing a red skirt, I think it was. So when I saw the red, we just affectionately called her Cheryl.
Does she know that there's a coffee machine named after her?
I'm pretty sure Bud would have told her, because Bud loves that sort of thing. That's his heartstrings, is when you can put his family in there. So
we're gonna have to do I think at some point we're gonna have to, and we've talked about this before, get together again, and because now you've mentioned you've named a coffee after him, you've named a coffee maker after. I'm fascinated by where originally we did this at the Lakeland Brewing Company. And I do have plans in the works to get Colin back on this podcast, and we're going to talk about the story behind the names of all the beers he's done, or as many as we can fit into 30 minutes, if that's possible. But he's going to tell us about the beer. I'm going to sample the beer.
That's a great idea. Call me if you need backup.
You know what? That might be one of the first times we do this with a live audience.
That's exactly.
We can all enjoy it together there.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking maybe that's something down the line here, because I'm actually quite interested with the history of the house that you guys are in, and that kind of stuff too. I'm fascinated by old buildings history. There's a Facebook page called Abandoned Alberta.
Yes.
And I could stare at those pictures the individual. I don't know who the person is that ran. I think they've released a book, but it's pictures.
We have the book. We got the book for Christmas.
Fantastic.
Yes, it's on my coffee table. You can come look at it.
Perfect.
Yes.
So I'll come enjoy the book. And what an appropriate place to have that book, even though the house isn't abandoned, but well preserved. So we'll maybe get into more about that. Maybe book a time, maybe when your husband's not working, and we can get him on this as well, and some of his insight. And then as well as talk about the story behind all the coffees.
For sure.
So we can sample coffee there. So
absolutely.
Okay, Breana, And of course, there's no more secrets here
Now
on this
I
podcast.
know.
Now you know. The way we wrap this up, you're someone here who's been recommended by several people as someone completely interesting. So, of course, we're going to have you on this show. But now I'd like to know if you had to come up with a name of someone you find completely interesting.
Yeah.
Not saying they have to come on the show.
Yeah.
But if they want to, we'll make the arrangements and do this all again. Who would you recommend?
I would really recommend Miss Janice Mill. So
right.
she's a local girl, like local now, married
Right.
a local guy, and she's just a wonderful, wonderful human.
Right on. Perfect. So well, maybe you want to pitch it to her, see if she'd be interested in something like this.
I'll throw a text to her. Yeah. I'll tell her and she'll be like, what did you do?
No pressure. No pressure. But thank you again, not only for agreeing to do this initially, but bearing with us with the technical difficulty we had a couple nights ago. This has gone, well, both went very well. I just wish I had both here to share with everybody, but I think we got the gist of what we did before. So again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time twice now in the same week to join me on this podcast. This has been once again Breana Malcomson on Now for Someone Completely Interesting. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed the podcast, please make sure you find us on your favorite podcast provider. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, and you can find us by searching Poulin Radio. And of course, the name of the show, Now for Someone Completely Interesting.